Welcome to Rejected Religion Spotlight. My guest today is Ninian Nijhuis. Some of you might recognize Ninian from an earlier Spotlight interview regarding Carl Jung. But today she's back to talk with me about Sidereal Astrology. But before we get into all of that, a little introduction. Ninian holds a BA in law and an LLM in international public law from the University of Utrecht in the Netherlands. In October of last year, she graduated cum laude at the University of Amsterdam in the Research Master in Religious Studies. Ninian's main focus is on Western esotericism, and her key fields of interest are Jungian psychology, sidereal astrology, mysticism, spirituality, and its connections to science. In addition, she is head of social media at the Center for History of Hermetic Philosophy and Related Currents, otherwise known as the HHP Center, at the University of Amsterdam, and currently works as a sidereal astrologer and coach. And that last part is what we will be focusing on today. So welcome, Ninian. Welcome back.
Well, thank you for having me again. I'm glad to be back.
Wonderful. So we are going to be talking about a lot that people can read for themselves in an article that you have written that people can find on academia.edu. It's titled Western Sidereal Astrology from Ancient Babylonia to the Modern West. So basically what we'll be talking about, all of that information is found in this article. So if people would be interested in reading it for themselves.
For sure.
Most people would likely know what is meant, generally speaking, when astrology is mentioned, but the type of astrology that we'll be discussing today, called sidereal astrology, might be lesser known and maybe a little confusing to some. So it's a lot to unpack, I know, but for the sake of this discussion, I'd like to start out with a bit of history and the definitions of the two main types of astrology that you've researched. So if you could start by talking about what astrology is and where it originated, and the differences between these two systems, the tropical and the sidereal systems of astrology.
Yes, that's a perfect start. So, I mean, astrology has kind of been described as a way, well, most say it's basically based on where the planets are located in the sky. And over the centuries, decades, dating back to the second millennium BCE, so Babylonian times, it's basically considered to be the oldest science/craft. In the sense that they've been kind of observing the celestial sky for ages, in order to kind of make sense, I guess, if I may say so, to make sense of existence of what is happening above and how that connects perhaps to what is happening below. So. If anybody ever heard of the Emerald Tablet, which is with Hermes Trismegistus, like one of the principles is called as above, so below, as within, so without. That principle has been a lot connected to astrology, as in that somehow the configurations in the sky kind of related to what happens on Earth by analogy. And then you have, so this is kind of a craft or a science that originated in Babylonia, and from that space it has migrated to Greece and Egypt, and from Greece it has gone into the West, or kind of the Western playing field, and then also from in Babylonia it has also migrated to the East. So in India, they use Vedic, most popular form of astrology is Vedic astrology or Vedic astrology. And they use basically the same way of calculating, more or less the same, than kind of the system that I've researched and that I also use in my personal practice, which is called Sidereal Astrology. The most common type of astrology that's been used in the West is called tropical astrology. For the fact that it has lost its connections to the heavens, but it's still connected to the seasons. So the first day of spring is 0 point Aries, first day of summer is 0 point Cancer, and you can continue. But because of one astronomical fact, which is called the precession of the equinoxes, there is, and this is so we're going a bit technical here because that's kind of needed in order to understand what's happening in astronomy when it comes to the zodiac and the Earth, is that the Earth spins on an axis and it wobbles because it's not completely round. So that wobble is about 23 degrees. And what happens with that wobble is that every 72 years, the Earth shifts in respect of the zodiac. And this happened over time, like very slowly. But now, 2,000 years later, from kind of the moment that tropical astrology was established in ancient Greece by Ptolemy, it's about 25 degrees difference, which is almost an entire astrological sign, which is 30 degrees. And so that is kind of, in sidereal astrology, you still calculate that in. So in that sense, it's more accurate in terms of astronomy.
We were experiencing some technical difficulties with the internet connection, but let's pick it up where you left off. You were explaining how the tropical and the sidereal systems, due to the Earth's wobble on its axis, changed the positioning, and the systems therefore became kind of separated in that they weren't linking up anymore as far as the zodiacal signs were concerned. And you were going to give an example about how this actually works, and you were going to give you an example of your birthday, and that's when everything went crazy. So if you could pick it up from there.
Okay, good. Then yes. Perfect. So, so I'll give an example that I often give, which using my own birthday. So I was born on the 4th of January, which would make me a Capricorn sun in tropical astrology. And so how I often express it is that if I was born 2,000 years ago, the sun would have actually been in Capricorn on that date. But in 1994, which is my birth year, the sun was actually located in the middle of the constellation of Sagittarius.
You were saying that 2,000 years ago, the sun would have been in Capricorn, but today that it's in Sagittarius with this sidereal system, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So again, with the technical issues, it's always a lovely thing. You never know what to expect with these interviews. Nope. Okay, so picking up where we left off again. If 2,000 years ago, your birthday, the sun in the tropical system as well is in Capricorn.
Yeah. Because
those two systems were linked at that time.
Exactly,
right.
and that is kind of the interesting thing. When for me, also doing the research and looking into the history, is that at that time, the Babylonians created astrology. Then it got taken up in ancient Greece, and even though also around the time of Ptolemy, which is basically considered to be the father of Western astrology. So what they often used was kind of the vernal point, which is the point on what is like the first day of spring. They would often use, for instance, the vernal point 0 Aries, and they would use that point as the way to calculate the rest of the positions.
Okay.
But the 0 point Aries was never basically the only one that was used. It was either or 10 Aries or 8 Aries, 3 Aries. It just kind of depended on which system you used or which favored astrologer you had, and you would use his calculations to kind of base your calculation on. And this was also because the precession wasn't understood at that time.
Right.
It was based, the entire kind of view of the universe, of their cosmology, was based on a geocentric universe, which basically they thought that the Earth was the center of the universe instead of the sun. And so they believed, they knew, because Hipparchus, which is was like a couple centuries before Ptolemy, he found out that there was a sort of shift happening. With like with so many years, like the point would kind of shift. But he didn't know really what that was. And at that time, it was basically argued as the ninth sphere, which is the sphere of the fixed stars, and like if you have a cosmological representation of the Earth and the heavenly spheres where all the planets were in, they kind of believed that the ninth sphere was on itself moving. So that sphere was moving and not the Earth itself. That was like a theory. And at one point also, Ptolemy has acknowledged in his work that there was something like a shift, and he uses Hipparchus's work in kind of arguing that, but he believed that it was 1 degree every 100 years. And there was also a theory called trepidation, which basically thought that point would go 10 degrees Aries and then 16 degrees back and then 16 degrees forth, so that it would kind of oscillate around one point. It wasn't until Copernicus in 1600, 1600, 1700, around those decades were kind of the decades where astronomy really developed and science really developed, and where astrology got kind of kicked out of the universities. Copernicus was basically the one who kind of kicked that off with his astronomy, where he placed the Earth, like where he kind of said the Earth is not the center of the universe. Kepler was actually the one who placed the sun at the center of the solar system. So Copernicus did not, but he said that just the Earth was kind of revolving a middle point, which was closer to the sun. And so and he kind of observed that at his time it was a 21 degree shift with the calculations of Ptolemy. That kind of set off the big debate of like, is astrology real or is it not? And then eventually, like, it got kind of killed by public execution. Like, it was, it's not a surprise. The church didn't like astrology. The scientific community didn't really side with it. So there were only a few minds that were still kind of defending astrology, and eventually it just kind of became more into the popular spheres and continued on, but not in any really academic context until like much later, I would say. And Kepler was one of the people who still defended astrology, but he kind of stepped away from using the astrological signs, because he believed that with kind of Copernicus's work, that those signs their use got kind of disproven for the fact that it wasn't accurate anymore with the actual astronomical positions. So he focused on the angles and the aspects, which the aspects are basically what kind of angles the planets make to each other, and based on that they make interpretations of what that means. And then also the angulars, which is kind of the north, east, southwest point of an astrological chart, of what that means. Because those points and those aspects and the angulars, they don't shift. They're identical in both the tropical and the sidereal system. Because the only thing that actually changes is the zodiac. So basically the zodiac, the zodiacal circle is the thing that shifts. Okay. So just to wrap up the question, tropical astrology is still connected to the seasons, but it has lost its connections to the stars. And sidereal astrology has maintained the connection to the stars since the time that it was invented. basically.
Okay. So to recap for those who might be a little confused because of the technical difficulties we were having.
Yes.
We had two systems, or there probably were more systems as you talk about. There were more systems, but we're focusing on these two. We had the tropical and the sidereal. The tropical was more based upon seasons or included seasons in its system, whereas the sidereal was about the fixed stars or the positions of the stars in the sky. And because people thousands of years ago didn't understand that the Earth wobbled on its axis, there was this question as to why these two systems started to kind of separate from each other with regard to measuring and the time and the position of the stars and that type of thing. So if I'm on track here, stop me if I'm wrong. So because of these two systems, the question then arose: why is this happening? All other things that were happening in the discovery of science as well. Found out that the Earth is not in the center of the solar system; it's the sun. And then because of the influence of religion, ideas about astrology as a divination system, that was kind of looked down upon as we don't want to do that. And also because I guess due to just a series of unfortunate events, because of all of this confusion surrounding these systems of astrology, it became kind of discredited. Is that safe to say?
Yeah,
okay.
It got discredited in a big way because it was always considered also a science, and it lost its scientific foundations completely. When they found out that tropical astrology was actually not accurate astronomically.
Astronomically, right.
And the last thing that is perhaps interesting, at the time that tropical astrology was created, or was kind of developed upon by Ptolemy, it was sidereal in the sense that it was connected to the constellations. He fixed it at a 0 point. Technically, it was at that point, like the first day of spring was in 1 degree Aries, which is, at the time, with the kind of the standards that they had, that was a pretty accurate thing to say that it was 0 Aries. So at that time, basically kind of the zodiac that they used, or the astronomy that they used, was still in line with the sidereal system. But that changed if you then keep using that same system 8,000 years in the future, because then it's not sidereal anymore, because it doesn't actually represent. So,
Okay. So we have these two systems that are now separated from each other, and they're not in sync anymore with each other. Why was then tropical astrology chosen, quote unquote, as the more popular form in the West, and the sidereal form was chosen in the East as the more popular form, with the Vedic astrology, as you mentioned?
Yeah, so with the West, it's pretty safe to say that that's has everything to do basically with the fact that Western culture happened, like it a big chunk of it originated in antiquity, in ancient Greece. So because that was and also because of Ptolemy's work, like his works got enormously popular when it came to astrology, and that were also kind of the works that survived into the decades kind of after that, and were the works that were used or the kind of the go-to works for reference when it came to astrology. So I would say that his work popularized it in a really major way. And also established tropical astrology, therefore, as the used form of astrology in the West. When it comes to the East, that's a bit different, because, I mean, in my paper, I write as well that it's a bit difficult to talk about how it exactly migrated into the East, because most of their traditions are all based on oral traditions. So it's not a lot is like all put in books. A lot of it is based on oral just from one elder to another,
right.
in that sense, like blatantly said. So, and there was not really kind of an intervention from the Greek world. So what my research suggests, and what I feel kind of is probably the way it happened, but obviously, like, there's so much research to be done in this field in that sense, is that it's kind of straight from Babylonia went into the East. And the kind of the East, or like predominantly I would even say India, because like astrology, Vedic astrology is I would say most popular in India. They did talk about also the fact that the precession or the vernal point was moving. They just didn't really know what it meant, but they still observed it, and that's how they calculated it in, even though they did not understand really what was happening. And there are also some Arabic sources that talk about the fact that there's a shift, but still they didn't really understand kind of what was going on. So with India, it just kind of the system that they used went straight from Babylonia into that culture, and they kind of build upon it with their own myths, stories, like way of doing astrology. Because Vedic astrology is really different from tropical astrology, but also even Western sidereal astrology. Like they've used the same signs and the same planets, but there are a lot of differences in that. And I've gone into it a little bit, but I'm still, in that sense, I'm still a student. But yeah, so they kept the sidereal way of calculating through the ages. And there are still some astrologers today that use a tropical system. That's true. And there is also a lot of Greek material that went into India. But I would say that for the biggest part of it, the tropical way of calculating was not one of them. They always kept the fixed stars as kind of their point of calculation, and those stars don't move. And the vernal point does. Because the vernal point, which is the first day of spring, is very time sensitive with the precession, but the fixed stars don't. Right. So they use a different ayanamsha, which is kind of is basically the point they use for their calculations, which is based on a fixed star instead of the first day of spring.
Okay, so you mentioned earlier before the technical difficulty started that your birth date, as the example that you used, was originally in Capricorn, and now with the shift, if you look at tropical, if I'm understanding correctly, it's now in a different house, or it's now in a different sign?
Sign.
Okay.
In sidereals, it would be a different sign.
Okay, in sidereal, it would be a different sign. So this is almost one full sign that it's shifted out of sync with the tropical system. Okay.
Almost 25 degrees. So there's like about a 5-degree overlap.
Okay. Yeah. So I just wanted to make that clear, because that will probably come up again later when we start talking about the sidereal system and how that works. So, actually, I can just ask you now, getting into more of the resurgence of the sidereal system. Who can be credited with this rediscovery in the West? If you could talk more about that.
Of course. So that's actually, it's very, it's quite interesting, because so basically in the late 19, so early 20th century is basically when Western sidereal astrology was reestablished, in a sense of using the sidereal way of calculating within Western astrology. And this can be attributed to Cyril Fagan, which is an Irish astrologer who came from a very good family. His father was a doctor. He actually wanted to become a physician, but he wasn't able to because he had scarlet fever when he was a child. So he was almost completely deaf, which made that he couldn't study in university because he couldn't listen to lectures. So he self-studied and started taking up astrology. So he started studying astrology around 1916, became well known for his work around 1930s, and he established the Irish Astrological Association. And then in 1944 was when he found out that the Babylonians, who were the originators of astrology, were using a different system that he was kind of practicing. So, and how that happened is actually, so Akkadian, which is the language of the Sumerians, was all of those tablets that were found were translated and published around that time as well. So Cyril Fagan, out of kind of interest, started to dive into the history of astrology to kind of get a better understanding of his craft or his practice. And that's where he found that the Babylonians were using a sidereal zodiac and not a tropical one. And going deeper and deeper into that, his research forced him to reform the way he did astrology. And he took up the sidereal system, and he basically made it his life's work to get Western sidereal astrology, or Babylonian astrology, how he called it, to put it on the map. And he was joined by some other astrologers. Donald A. Bradley was a big name. They were both responsible for creating the Fagan-Bradley Ayanamsha, which is also the Ayanamsha I use in my work. It's very close to the India, like Lahiri Ayanamsha, which is used in India. It's about a 1 degree difference. But it's modeled after Babylonian astrology. And they published works. Donald Bradley actually had a pseudonym a different name he used for his publication, which was Garth Allen. And then you have Roy Firebrace and Rupert Gleedow. Those 4 names were pretty important in getting Western sidereal astrology on the map.
All right, so we have this reintroduction of sidereal astrology. And I can imagine that this would be confusing for people then, because the tropical system is no longer in sync with the sidereal system. And what does this mean then for you, or for anyone who is practicing a sidereal astrology? Mm-hmm. How is this then, how do you compensate then for the understandings that people have? Like, you were born in the sign of Capricorn. I was in the tropical system then, right? Mm-hmm. In the tropical system, I would be born in the sign of Pisces, but in the sidereal system, I'm probably not Pisces anymore. I'm probably Aquarius. So how can we explain then these traits that are associated with these signs? How do you go about that as a sidereal, quote unquote, astrologist to explain that to people so that they can understand it?
So personally, I am really, in my practice, I will never look just at somebody's sun sign. In a sense that their entire birth chart is important. Judging, you should never judge somebody based on any signs they have, because that's not the way you should do it. And in a sense of, your sun says just one thing about your personality. Right. Same as your moon sign says something big about your personality. Your ascendant, your rising sign or ascendant, your moon or your sun are basically the 3 pillars of your personality. Those are 3 major ones. Mercury is also pretty important, but those 3 ones are if you really want to know, if you really want to get a sense of someone, those three are very important. When it comes to like both different systems, because you have this a lot, right? That people really identify with their sun sign. And I would be the last person to say like, no, you're wrong. Or like in a sense, if, you know, kind of go really rash about that. Because I do see that tropical astrology can work in kind of in practice, in the sense of that it's both it's still a system. So there is a way of kind of, if that is the astrology you have practiced for your entire life, like when it comes to astrology as an astrologer, you make it your own. It's working with the system, and it's learning to interpret based on the material, based on intuition, based on your own experience. It's basically a big combination of all of that. When it comes to tropical astrology, because because this is basically how I started. I got into astrology because most of myself was skeptical a bit. And I had a lot of time on my hands because I was traveling. So I was like, why not? Why not just look into it and see what is there? And I was researching my chart in the tropical system. And there was like a lot that I can kind of relate to, and a lot that I could really see myself in. But especially when it came to my sun sign, there was always something that I was like, yeah, I see that, but it almost felt more like something that was put on me than something that I really felt was me. And then, one day I was trying to put my details in every calculator on the internet I could get my hands on, because I was trying to just, have the scientific method of like, just try and see if there are any incongruences or discrepancies. This is not the biggest amount of data I kind of wanted to accumulate. And one calculator gave me back entirely different signs for my moon and my sun and my ascendant. And I got very confused. Checked about 4 times if I maybe, I don't know, put in the wrong birthday or birth year or anything. But no, I was still that. And then I found out that was Sidereal Astrology. And I had never heard of it. So I kind of researched more into it and learned about what it was about, and that it was more accurate in a sense of astronomy and all of that. And I was like, okay, I'll do an experiment with myself, which is take both charts, researching them side to side, and then see which one resonates most, and then do the same with my best friends and family. Because those were the people I know the most, so that would be the easiest one to kind of, as accurately as possible, see which one fits better. And that just, for me, researching my own sidereal chart it was creepy. It was like, it made so much sense. And I just got hooked in the sense of that my rational brain didn't understand it, because it was like, how this is weird. Like, how is that possible? But still, I felt, it was also just kind of an intuition of like, there's something here. And since then, like at one point, the sidereal system convinced me based on my own experience and based on the people that I've read after that, also complete strangers and people I met on the road. And that was almost 7 years ago. So, and I've stuck to it. I haven't come across anything that kind of proves to me otherwise. And I've really seen it work for myself and also for my clients and a lot of other people. So, to me, it's always been really fascinating. And, it became a really big passion of mine.
Interesting that you came to it from a position of being very skeptical and not really putting much stock into it. That's very interesting. I was also wondering if you could talk about what, so you gave kind of a background on a personal note of how you came to know about astrology and how you're working with it yourself. How did this translate then into academic research?
Yes, so that's actually a funny one, because when I started doing astrology, it was way before I did the masters in Western esotericism at the UvA. And I was actually, before that, I was really considering studying astrology in some way, shape, or form. Because I felt like that training could actually benefit me. But then I found the masters in Amsterdam, and I was like, okay, astrology is part of Western esotericism, so maybe that is a good, would be a good place to dive more into the history, because that for me was very, I was very curious to see what is the history behind it. It's like, why has astrology been something that has been fascinating to people for millennia, basically? Yeah. And how did it originated, and how did tropical astrology came to be, if sidereal astrology was the original one? And I remember reading some papers in the beginning of my master's where it was mentioned that Galileo and also Kepler were talking about a reform of astrology. And I remember asking in class, being like, but what was this reform about? So is this, and nobody really seemed to know the answer. And so then for one class, I got the opportunity to use history as kind of a field to go into the history of astrology. And there is a lot there, and like that's how I wrote the paper, and a lot of it kind of became more illuminated, whereas the research that I've done does suggest that Kepler wanted a reform because of the fact that the precession of the equinoxes was discovered. But there's still a lot with, like, just Kepler's work in that context would be a PhD. Like there's like a lot, and it's also why I wanted to use it as a research focus is because it's a really relatively new field. Also, Cyril Fagan, he kind of jump-started it, but he passed away in 1970, and the three people that were researching alongside him all died 4 years later in the same year in 1974. So that was a big hit for the research and kind of the development of that astrology. And it has been picked up in the 90s a bit more. And there are some sidereal astrologers that are doing more academic work or more kind of research on it. But not a lot. There's not a lot being done on the work, and especially when it comes to actually the historical research. There are more sidereal astrologers that are using it in this practice, but when it comes to the history actually of that, it's a bit more still a bit in the dark, I would say. Right. So that for me, it felt like just a perfect thing to research, especially because there hasn't been that much written on the topic already. So I felt lucky to be able to, okay, this is actually something that is not so well done. Done a lot.
Well, it was a perfect fit for you because you took your personal interest and mixed it in with your academic interest and your research there, and also your article, which I recommend everybody reads because it goes into a lot more detail into history and how astrology and astronomy were so closely related to each other in the past, and how
it was the same word.
It basically meant the same thing, as you said, and how this has then separated from each other and became these completely different ways of thinking about the world and how people relate to relate in the world to each other, to nature, to the cosmos, etc., how those two concepts became so separated, and now they're considered to be completely different things. So interesting stuff. I really recommend that everybody out there goes to academia.edu and reads that article. On a more personal note, let's stay with the personal side of the story. You've recently started a platform of your own as an astrologer and a coach, and you use a combination of Jungian psychology, that was the topic of your first visit here on Spotlight, and the Sidereal Astrology system in your work. So you use both of those concepts. Can you talk more about this, how you're using it, what it means to you, why you feel that they connect or click so well together that you can use these in your work?
Yeah, so I started a website. I have a website now where it's a lot of things. It has the academic work I've done, but it also has a blog with about astrology where I give new moon updates, full moon updates, but also I started a series about kind of giving my interpretations of each sun sign, and it's just starting. So I hope that eventually it will become a platform where people can just go to research astrology themselves. And I also give readings and do coaching. My biggest focus at this point is on the readings, but I'm open for anything, but just the readings have been a bit more popular than the coaching. And with the readings, basically what I do is and this has been really also an interesting experience for myself, because how a lot of my readings work is that people send me their, basically just a name, or not even a name, and their birth details, and they tell me which kind of reading they would like to have, or what they would like to know more about, or which questions they want answered, or want to have more insight on. And I draw up I pull their birth charts, and I give a audio recording that I send. I will eventually also do written readings, but at this point it's just audio recordings, and I send that to them. This is without any personal knowledge about who these people are. So for me, it's also been really interesting to see that every one of the people that I've read so far have been all positive, have all given me positive feedback. Some even that people were kind of just really, really surprised of like, wow, this is insane. You're describing me as much as a good friend could, as good as a good friend could do. Which for me every time, because I'm always a bit terrified and scared whenever I put a reading out, because I have a very critical brain, very rational brain. Other side also definitely a more spiritual kind of emotional, intuitive side to myself. So sending that, although I do take it really seriously and make sure that the research I do and kind of the way I formulate things is as good as can be. But still, it's always a bit of a leap, like it feels. So to have such positive feedback really kind of has been a big indicator of like, okay, you can continue with this. So that was basically the work that I do is purely astrological. And then with the coaching, because I'm receiving training with the NAP, which is basically the Dutch version of the International Association for Analytical Psychology. So I'm planning to complete a 4-year program to become an accredited Jungian analyst. And then in my practice, I would like to really combine astrology with Jungian theory in a sense of, so I would never use astrology as a end-all, be-all of in sessions. It will be a tool that I use, in a sense of what I often have found in my practice is that a chart, it gives you kind of, it almost gives you, for instance, if you have an adult coloring book, we have like just the outlines of a drawing, that would be kind of the birth chart. Then the person sitting in front of me or my client is the one who colors that, who gives it gives it content, gives it shape, gives it its shine. So I always let the person sitting in front of me inform the birth chart that I'm looking at, in a sense of, because there is so much when it comes to the interpretation of astrology. There are so many little variables, and it's really kind of the big thing is trying to interpret the chart as a whole. And that is something that is really learned over years, maybe decades even, where it's kind of this skill that you have to kind of, you have to keep training. So for me, it's if, for instance, because this is often like sometimes like, yeah, but like, are you not, like there is a lot of people that are, if they are very skeptical about astrology, able to give me a lot of questions, and I welcome those questions all the time, because for me it's a good also mental exercise to kind of see where I'm coming from and to get myself in check. That if I see something, I will honestly use that basis on the kind of questions that I would ask. In a sense of, if that person says, no, that's not what I have, then I was like, oh, probably there's some other variable. And then, but it's basically a tool to not have to step into something. Like, it gives you kind of a jump start on bonding with the person that is sitting in front of you, because you have a tool that helps you to understand where they're coming from, the challenges that they're going through, that they will face in life, are going through, and also kind of the little like paradoxes and peculiarities of their persona and their personality. Astrology gives a tool. It gives kind of a guidepost, a lamppost, it's almost like a flashlight in the dark. The same is where in Jungian psychology it's a lot about dreams. And that is about symbolism, which is also a lot in astrology. It's also about mythologies, which is also a really big thing in Jungian psychology. Whether it's mythology or esotericism or alchemy or religion, like the symbols of kind of our history are very big for the interpretations of a person's dreams. So both those theories, there would be, it's a combination of them. And I would like to write about that at one point as well, to kind of publish on how they kind of interact. And Jung himself got into astrology as well back in the days, but that was still in the time that he was in contact with Freud, and Freud was a tad skeptical about it, which is not very surprising given his disdain for religion as well. But Jung was aware of the fact that there was the precession. And that's also a belief that there's also, there is a reference in his work where he said, like, yeah, but the astrological signs are different now because of the precession. It's so many degrees difference. So he was aware of that, which I found very interesting. But there's definitely a lot more that I can do research on in that regard. But I think there's definitely a lot of potential there. And it's been done. I think Liz Green is a name within the tropical astrological world that also I believe she's a Jungian as well, and she's done some research as well. So,
I see. Yeah. There are a lot of people that, of course, are skeptical of astrology and this whole notion of people's characteristics and qualities. That some kind of system can explain that we're all supposed to be unique individuals, and how can there be a system that already has everything planned out for us? That there's this kind of what do they call that, cognitive dissonance, that how can that be? And there are a lot of people that would like to discredit astrology and saying that, well, you could just give a piece of paper with all of these things written on it and give it to a whole group of people, and they all read it and they all say, oh yes, this explains me to a T. There is as you well know, there is this concept within the Hermetic teachings in Western esotericism that they call it the great chain of being, that that everything, and that's what gets back to what you were talking about, as above, so below, as within, so without, this adage that everything is connected, and that the cosmos, the stars, they're having some kind of influence on ourselves, our bodies, our minds, our emotions, etc. And because of our, I guess, enlightenment ideals nowadays, it's very hard for us to reconcile this scientific side with this more intuitive and maybe connectedness, idea of everything being interconnected. And astrology, of course, is that idea of the interconnectedness. How do you, what does that mean to you as far as the astrology, and just in your own personal opinion, astrology, and how do you not so much explain to people who are like wanting to reject the idea, but how do you place this into our sense of what reality is and in how we live in the world, if that makes any sense?
Yeah. No, it does make sense. Okay. It's a big question, but it does make sense. No, but I can answer that definitely in kind of my own understanding of life, reality, the big questions, right? But yeah, so I mean, it kind of also interacts with what I did, my master thesis, where I talked about madness and divine madness, and where basically kind of this dichotomy of rationality and irrationality is also plays a big part, where because of the Enlightenment, rationality or rational thinking has been basically put on a pedestal as like the thing that makes us evolved human beings, and sets us apart from animals, for instance. But it's quite interesting because Jung talks about this a lot in his work as well, where actually the idea that that everything is like that, the universe is more alike to a machine, and it's all based on set laws and set principles, and that kind of object science is the holy grail of truth. It's a relatively new thing. Like before the Enlightenment, like humanity was not like that. We always lived with kind of this also, and when I say the word irrational, I mean it as stripped from its negative connotations, because irrationality has been viewed as negative, and I don't necessarily see it as negative. I just see it as the opposite to rationality. Right. And within that irrational sphere, there are emotions, and there is love, and there is loss, and there's grief, and these are all the things that actually make life worth living. And so I believe to look at them as being second grade is actually doing our own happiness or our own kind of human being human at the surface. So I really believe that kind of, the biggest, the challenge is to somehow give both of those sides a place in your life. And for me, astrology has kind of become a vehicle for that, where it's at one point has physical foundations in the sense of that it is related to science, in the sense that it's based on astronomical calculation. And then basically the rational part, or the more intuitive part, the more interpretational part, the more emotional part is how do you interpret that? What does it mean? It's like the meaning-making function of humans is to give, is to try to understand or give meaning to our experiences. And for me, that is also what astrology is. It's, the thing is astrology it's both determinism and it is free will. In a sense of astrology will give you basically a skeleton of your life. It will give you kind of the energy of some of the things that you're meant to experience in this lifetime. You're meant to face or to learn. And so it basically gives you a broad picture of the lessons that you're going to learn in this lifetime. How those lessons are filled in and how you learn them, because you can learn, for instance, how to swim in different ways, is up to yourself and kind of also the course of the choices that you make. So in that sense, it's, and I believe that even with the analogy thing of that somehow everything is connected, is that it doesn't have to be connected even by cause and effect. It can also be connected by analogy, in the sense of that it's not that one is the cause of the other, but it's basically just one is parallel to the other. And this is purely theoretical, because like to really, this is the thing with astrology, that a lot of people kind of are deterred from it, because there is really no real way of knowing for sure 100% objective truth, or ascertaining that it's either true or not. And a lot of people, they find it uncomfortable to live with that. I myself do not necessarily, in a sense of as long as I can ground it in my own personal experience, as long as it's kind of based on logic, as long as it comes, like it's within my subjective truth, and I'm staying very mindful of both rationality and irrationality. That's basically how I kind of navigate through it. And you'll make mistakes, of course. Like this course, it's trial and error, honestly. But yeah, like it's kind of this thing which I think is also within the Western esoteric field is like, the kind of this drive of this is a really Western esotericism being, the rejected knowledge. Is the thing of this is a really big part of our history, of our human history, and it has been kind of pushed aside by science and religion alike, because it's a field of study that somehow hangs in the middle of the two, and that is uncomfortable, because it's not one and it's not the other. And I think that ultimately, perhaps, we would all benefit from it if we learn to look at the world through both like the rational and irrational eyes, and to balance those sides within ourselves and without ourselves, because I think that it will just only enrich our lives, so we can try to do that, and it will also perhaps make us even happier, because like in a sense of bringing some meaning back, and daring to explore your own subjective truth, which doesn't have to replace objective truth. And I think that's really important for people to know. Being an astrologer doesn't mean you're against anything scientific or objective. If anything, it's for me personally, I love science. I'm very interested in it. I will always, if something is objectively true, I will never go against that, if that is the kind of the norm, and it makes sense and it's logical. But it doesn't prevent me from kind of dipping my toes into the other side, and to kind of like going beyond that and see what does it mean to me and my life, and how do I understand it, if that is not something that can be answered by scientific observation. Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing that. That was very beautifully stated. I think this dovetails very very nicely in with what you were talking about before, when you were a guest earlier on the Spotlight show, that we were talking about the whole idea of balance and integrating these two sides, and becoming that, Jung calls that individuation, where you're becoming your full person. So that's nice how these two concepts are meshing so well together. For as you explained it, that's very, very very interesting, and makes you think about all of this a little bit
Yeah.
more deeply. So thank you
does.
again for sharing that. In closing, where can people learn more about what it is that you're doing? Where can people find you?
Okay, so I believe that with the publication of this podcast, my information will all be there.
Yep,
but so I have a website, which is Ninian Sidereal Astrology.com. And then I'm on Instagram as well, at Ninian Nijhuis, which is basically my first and my last name. I also have a astrology Instagram, which is Ninian_Sidereal Astrology. Although I'm having some difficulties with Instagram at the moment because I believe Instagram thinks I'm a bot. Well, I'm not a bot. But it's like...
Oh dear.
But I hope that kind of clears up when I will just continue on, and at one point Instagram gets the memo that I'm a normal person. So that Instagram, and I also have a Facebook page with my name and then Sidereal Astrology, which is all kind of linked on my website and on my Instagram. It's kind of this circular thing of if you find one, it's easily you can find the others.
Find the other.
And then I have my academia page, where's my work, but my work is also on my website. So if you ever want to get in contact with me, message me through the website or send me a personal message on Instagram, for instance, whatever is more convenient to you. I'm open to anything, if of course readings, coaching sessions, but also just general questions. Because I will at one point want to also start a webinar series or anything like that where people can come and learn astrology.
Excellent.
And anything like that, but yeah.
Well, excellent. Great. I will certainly include all of those links in the description box for people to check out. And they can find you there. And then, of course, people are also welcome to comment on this video if they'd like to ask questions here. I'll forward those on to you, of course. Hopefully we can get some people interested in this topic of sidereal astrology, and we can start to learn a little bit more about it. So that would be a wonderful thing, I think. Well, Ninian, I would like to thank you for joining me yet again for today's discussion. I wish you much success in your endeavors. Thank you as well to the viewers and the listeners out there. I hope this was enjoyable for you as well, because I had a great time talking with Ninian today. So thank you again, Ninian. All the best to you.
Thank you for having me. Yes, you too.
Thank you. Well, that's all for now. Be safe out there, everybody, and I'll see you next time. Bye.
Ciao.